Chapter 7. One day in Janakpur, while sitting alone on the edge of a still lake in the early morning dawn, a peculiar-looking sadhu sat down beside me. His opening words were startling. "Beware, there are scorpions in the guise of butterflies." Shaken, I asked why he was saying this. He stared at me intently and spoke again. "Don't open yourself up to demons in the guise of holy men, or you may discover your life in ruins only when it's too late." "What are you talking about?" I asked, alarmed. "Perhaps I'll tell you another time." Abruptly changing the subject, he introduced himself as Vasudev and invited me to travel with him to a special historical place. I consented. A handsome man in his early 30s, Vasudev had the manners of an aristocrat, and his speech rang with the distinction of the Queen's English. He wore white robes which, curiously, were immaculately clean. His long, jet-black hair was neatly combed. In all my travels, I had never met such a well-groomed mendicant. He was learned in both spiritual and material subjects, and like many I had met in those parts, was a devotee of Rama. When my new friend invited me to travel by foot for 3 days to reach an obscure holy place, I agreed. We journeyed through countryside the whole day, each day receiving one of my favorite foods, some rice and dal, through begging. Whomever we met along the way was charmed by Vasudev's gentle nature. Vasudev insisted on doing all the cooking in an open field or forest, finding 2 rocks to form a stove and balancing the pot between them while I collected wood for the fire. He prepared the rice and dal with the finesse of an artist sculpting a masterpiece. As we walked along on pilgrimage, we discussed many subjects. Vasudev seemed to know about everything. But something puzzled me. Behind a mask of cheerfulness, I sensed that this man was tormented. Yet he strained to hide his suffering and hold back his tears. And my affection for and curiosity about him grew. Strangely, one night, while we were traveling together, sleeping in a cowshed to escape the rain, I had a horrible nightmare of being attacked by ghostly beings. I wondered, why? After 3 days, we reached our destination, a historical rock in an abandoned field. That evening, as the wind began to gust, we could taste and smell the humidity rising and knew that the monsoons were brewing an imminent downpour. We searched around for a shelter and found a small stone structure abandoned long ago. We entered and flushed out several bats that were hanging from the ceiling. They hastily flapped outside. The house consisted of nothing more than 1 room, about 10 feet by 10 feet, with 2 openings for what were once a window and a door. The walls were crumbling. Moss and cobwebs were the only furnishings. Once inside, we sat silently as thunder shook the earth. Winds lashed the trees, and a torrential rain poured down. Vasudev gazed at me through tear-filled eyes. He asked if he could pour out the storm in his heart. Honored that he would confide in me, I consented. Vasudev shared with me that he had been born to a well-to-do family in Calcutta and received a PhD, becoming a popular, celebrated professor. Having met other devotees, he too became devoted to Rama at this time. One day, he said, 2 distinguished persons visited my office, bringing gifts and food that they claimed were sent by their guru. After several such visits, they invited me to meet the guru. So I did. The guru knew everything about his life to the most private details and was able to read Vasudev's mind. Astounded, he accepted the man's invitation to visit him regularly. I listened intently, fascinated as ever to learn the story of how a person comes to accept a guru. One day, Vasudev continued, the guru revealed his mind. I have been carefully examining you, he said. You are young, popular, and intelligent. I need your help. I wish to initiate you into our rites. Vasudev choked back a strong emotion as he recalled these words. I told him I would think about it. His voice trailed off, and he buried his head in his palms, as if trying to bury untold miseries from the past. In desperation, he looked at me. Richard, he sighed, I don't want to pollute your mind with my horrible story, but I'm going mad. I must tell someone. May I continue? Please do. He stared out the window hole. A lightning bolt highlighted the anguish of his face. Finally, full of despair, he spoke. I commenced to do research on this man, and to my horror discovered that he was the leader of a powerful sect, a master in the black tantric arts. His eyes now penetrated mine. Do you know about black tantrics, Richard? No, I admitted. Vasudev shuddered and his voice trembled. He explained that tantric mysticism was extremely powerful and could be either beneficial or sinister. There are the white tantrics who use their powers to serve humankind, he told me. Then there were the black tantrics who use their powers to exploit people's lives for their own diabolical purposes. They gain terrible influence through unspeakable sacrifices, tantric sex rites, and yoga. This guru was an extremely powerful black tantric endowed with the power to control people's minds and manipulate their lives. In my research, I was appalled to find that at the time of the rites of initiation, he seized control over that soul for many lifetimes to come. I never went back. But Vasudev, if you got free, why do you still tremble and quake to think of him? That was only the beginning, he went on. Daily, the Guru's disciples harassed me in my office, in my home, or at any event I attended. I could not escape them. One day, 5 of them barged into my office and surrounded my desk. I felt like a hostage. The next moment, the Guru stood before me to claim my soul. He warned me, "It is too late. I have claimed you as my own. Surrender to me, and I will award you the pleasures of fame and fortune beyond your belief. But if you refuse, I vow to torment you till death." Boiling over with disgust, I refused his command. Cursing me, his eyes blazed with vengeance, and he stormed out. Vasudev sighed. One evening, when I returned home to my widowed mother, I found that she had fallen into his trap. Shaking with anger, she scolded, "Why have you offended that religious man? You must become his disciple." I was shocked. I tried to explain his cruel machinations, but she would not listen. The guru and his henchmen had effectively controlled her. After some day, she threw me out of my own house, saying she would not be party to my offenses. What was happening to my world? Then, under the sect's power, the president of my college fired me. Outside, lightning struck a tree and cracked off a huge limb, crashing it down on our rooftop. We sat speechless. An explosion of thunder that seemed to shake the universe followed the devastating lightning bolt. Vasudev paled. With a faltering voice, he continued, "Homeless and jobless, I was haunted by the Black Tantric's disciples wherever I went. They even influenced the police, who refused to protect me. What could I do but leave Calcutta? By his supernatural powers, this Black Tantric knew where I was at all time and dispatched his followers to harass me. Any job he landed, they convinced the employer to fire Vasudev, and any room he rented, they convinced the landlord to evict him. He even went to a newspaper to tell his story, but the reporters would not believe him. He said, "My life was in tatters." At that moment, a large toad hopped in through our doorway. His amphibious eyes gazed into mine. I wondered if he could be a secret agent of the Black Tantric and shuddered at the thought. Vasudev seemed to read my mind. "Are you sure you want me to continue?" he asked. Thunder rumbled in every corner of the sky. "I don't know anymore, Vasudev," I admitted. I was frightened, but it seemed important that I hear the story. "What happened after that?" Vasudev continued. "This evil yogi was incensed by my determination and resolved to murder me. With black rites and mantras, he created an invisible weapon that separates the soul from the body. In other words, it slays the victim. But the killing of the body is the least of it. In that interim period between life and death, the Black Tantric gains control of the subtle body covering the soul. As the sinister weapon struck, my body and mind were paralyzed with pain. I felt ghastly beings in ethereal forms haunting me, begging to be saved. I chanted the name of God. As long as the name of God was in my mind, the invisible weapon could not end my life. For a full day and night, the weapon tormented me. I knew if I ceased to remember the name for a moment, I would meet a fate worse than death. I chanted ceaselessly. The weapon was powerless to kill me in the presence of God's name. If an evil tantric weapon cannot kill its victim, it must return to slay its sender. The Black Tantric was struck dead, killed by his creation. God's name had saved me. Hearing this spooky tale, a wave of shivers rushed my body from head to toe. I leaned forward to hear more. "This evil mystic still exists," Vasudev said. "He just doesn't have a gross body. Now he controls his disciples from the astral plane, dispatching them to wherever I hide to seek revenge. They hunt me down at all times. I cannot settle in any one place because within a matter of weeks they terrorize me. The furious storm outside was beginning to subside. In the emerging silence, Vasudev sighed. It is for this reason, contrary to my will and my nature, that I have become a homeless mendicant. I know that if I genuinely surrender to God, He will protect me. But until that day comes, I must run and hide in the guise of a holy man. Crickets began to sing. Vasudev looked deeply into my eyes. I'm sorry to tell you all this. I've kept it to myself for years, but I had to speak to someone. Richard, I have no one to blame. It's ultimately my own doing. I couldn't understand how he could blame himself and asked him to explain. Modestly, he attributed his present troubles to his past life karma. He said, I don't know what I've done to deserve my miserable lot in life, but I know that it's justified. And I know that if I sincerely pass this test and surrender to the Lord, He will deliver me. Vasudev's trembling hand now held mine as he made one last appeal. Because you are my dear friend, I must advise you to abandon me, lest you get implicated. If I don't see you in the morning, I will understand. My brother, as you search for your path, please be cautious. You are exposing yourself to powerful beings, and not all are holy. And please pray for me. We sat in silence. I could not speak a word. I knew from what I'd already observed in India that many gurus had strong powers, including the power to sway followers to do whatever they asked. I was more terrified of what my companion had revealed to me than I had been of the pack of rabid dogs. The dogs I had been at least able to see and fend off. But how does one fend off the invisible forces of evil that could attack an unsuspecting person trying to follow a spiritual path? Vasudev then lay down on the dirt to sleep, with his arm as a pillow. But sleep was far from my mind. I gazed through the hole in the wall. There were stars emerging from the parting clouds, but no moon. Next to me, Vasudev tossed anxiously in his sleep. I thought, am I willing to be implicated in the harrowing complexities of his life? The thought caused me to shiver. I can think of no other way to help him except to pray. That is all he asked of me. As he tossed, turned, and groaned in his sleep, I walked far away into the night, praying that the path I was taking would be a safe one, and that he too might find safety and peace. My path continued to be rife with experiences both dark and light. each experience offering me a window into the different worlds that might await me were I to take certain turns and not others. Most of the sadhus who greeted me upon my return to Janakpur were old enough to be my grandfathers. I was praying in the Janaki temple when, to my surprise, a young Nepalese student by the name Vishnu Prasad approached me. Well-dressed, with a round face and pious demeanor, he was so fascinated to see a Western youth who had taken to the life of a sadhu that he invited me to his home in the village of Brahmapur. His home there was like a beautiful ashram, the wealth of the family evident in bright furnishings, carpets, brass vessels, and flower gardens. As I entered, Vishnu's mother and father cordially greeted me and served me a sumptuous meal of spiced vegetables and aromatic sauces and rice glistening with clarified butter. I happily spent several days there. Uncles, aunts, and cousins all lived under one roof, but I never heard a single voice rise in anger. They had nothing but respect for one another. In the morning, the children respectfully touched the feet of their parents, and the parents, in turn, offered blessings. No matter what their age, the children, even the teenagers, were naturally obedient to their elders, and the younger children showed honor to the eldest son as the representative of the parents. Having been brought up in the 1960s America, I experienced this teenage respectfulness as a pleasant kind of culture shock. Moreover, every inch of the house was immaculately clean, except me. I felt like a disheveled mendicant in a haven of class and refinement. My body looked quite beaten down, and taking note of this, the family gave me a medicinal balm for my bruised, cracked feet. Although they offered me my own room with a comfortable bed, I chose to sleep in the garden under an Ashoka tree. Each morning and evening, the family members would gather together for worship ceremonies in their small temple of Lord Rama in the center of the home, where during the day the women performed various devotions. I found nothing but happiness in their home. In the evenings, I sat with Vishnu Prasad in a pleasant garden among the marigolds, roses, and flower-bearing trees. Tara Prasad, his father, sometimes sat with us. A wealthy man with a wife and children, his purity of character was impressive, more so than many of the ascetics I had encountered. Spirituality is a matter of the heart, I pondered. The more I grew to love Vishnu Prasad's family members, the more of a friend he became to me. From these gentle souls, I learned much about the traditions of family life in the East. Most importantly, my realization that true spirituality comes in many forms was confirmed. However, I could not stay too long in these comfortable surroundings, for I had chosen the life of an ascetic. When it was time to go, the whole family saw me to the gate. They were crying as I turned and walked off down the brick path. And so was I. Now more than ever before, the path I was choosing struck me as strewn with unseen dangers. In my passion for truth, which admittedly I couldn't fully explain, I had left the comforts of home and continued to renounce comforts along the way. pressing on despite fears that arose at the uncertainties awaiting me. From Janakpur, I traveled back to Kathmandu Valley, just below the hill of Bodhanath, 7 miles east of the city. In a grove of flowering trees, I meditated. Opening my eyes, I looked up into a magnificent rainbow arching over the entire Himalayan valley that glowed against an indigo backdrop of monsoon clouds. I took a deep breath, drinking in a breeze of cool, earthy air. Soon, stomping footsteps nudged me out of my dreamy state and drew my attention to a European tourist marching through the field and carrying a large bag of groceries. Well over 6 feet tall, blond, with muscles bulging from beneath his t-shirt, he had the physique of a bodybuilder. Suddenly, from out of the forest, a gang of brown monkeys surrounded him. Although each monkey was only a fraction of his size, they knew how to find his weakest point and attack. They snarled and bared their teeth, threatening him with intimidating gestures. While holding the groceries in one of his massive arms, he hoisted a sizable rock in the other, and whooping like a warrior, threatened to pulverize the little bandits. But the monkeys were unfazed and only snarled louder. They took small leaps toward their target, succeeding in attacking his mind. Paralyzed with fright, the Hulk could only tremble like a scared child. Finally, one of the little monkeys stalked right up to him and seized the grocery bag from his hands. He didn't even resist. While the monkeys clustered around the bag to devour the groceries, they paid no heed. Reduced to a bundle of nerves, the He-Man slipped away. Seconds later, a skinny little Nepalese boy of about 8 years old appeared on the scene. The gang of monkeys had just begun feasting on their booty, but stirred with apprehension upon seeing the tiny boy. The child skipped toward them with a stone in his hand. The gang of bandits screeched, terror in their eyes. Suddenly they abandoned the food and fled in all directions. The little boy collected up the groceries and sat down to dine. Meanwhile, the monkeys anxiously watched him from a distance. I was amazed. What had just happened? That playful boy was hardly the weight of one bicep of the Herculean European. The monkeys were unfazed by the threats of the giant because they sensed fear in his mind. But they feared the child because he had no fear of them. What did this mean for me and my ever-narrowing path to God? I thought of the pack of wild dogs and of Vasudev's frightening tale of evil black tantric. I considered my fear of coming under the spell of an unscrupulous guru were I to choose too hastily. But I could see how fear could block my progress. We are vulnerable to defeat when our minds succumb to fear. The foreigner was unfamiliar with monkeys, but the Nepalese Tat had lived around monkeys all his life. So we fear what we don't know. Through knowledge of our spiritual nature and sincere faith in God, we can overcome all fear. Please, Lord, bless me with such courage as I find my way to you. As I pondered these thoughts, the smiling boy ran right up to me and offered some bananas from the grocery bag. The monkeys chattered with excitement, marking me as a prospective victim. They made me realize that I had more in common with that European than I would like to think. Feeling I had a long way to go on my path to reach the innocent, fearless faith of this child, I politely declined. While wandering in the forests, I came upon Sitaram Baba, an extraordinary soul whom I fondly remember as the Standing Baba. A bearded man of 62 with large brown eyes and a rugged complexion, Sitaram Baba wore a simple one-piece pullover of burlap from neck to ankles. When I asked him why he wore only burlap, he replied that the coarse, itching texture of burlap kept him always in an uncomfortable condition. This, he said, helped him to always seek comfort in remembering Rama. Even more amazing to me were the wooden splints he kept tied around his ankles. Strange as his appearance was, he immediately treated me with the love of a father for a son. Like yogis I had met in the Himalayas, Sitaram Baba followed extreme vows, far beyond the vow of celibacy. He vowed to always stand on his feet and never sit or lay down. That is why he wore wooden splints around his ankles to support his body. For almost 50 years he had observed this penance. Along with his begging pot and prayer beads, he carried a rope and a wooden plank that he would hang from a tree branch like a swing. At night, he would lean on this and sleep standing up. He also followed vows to never sleep inside walls, and besides, being a vegetarian, never ate grains or beans. I witnessed the severity of this dietary vow. Wandering mendicants typically subsist on inexpensive foods that people give easily in charity. Foods such as rice, dal, or rotis, unleavened wheat bread, all of which contain grains or beans. We wandered together. Every day, Sitaram Baba would blissfully beg rice and dal for me, collect wood, and build a fire under an improvised stove made of rocks, all the while standing or squatting. When the food was cooked, he lovingly offered it to a picture of his beloved Lord Rama, with prayers and mantras, and then gave it all to me. But I was curious. What did he eat? During my stay with him, I never saw him eat anything more than a handful of cheap peanuts given to him while begging. That's all he could collect that wouldn't violate his diet. Yet he was so happy to take pains to feed me nicely. He would explain that to show love for God, one must affectionately serve his children. One day, when Sitaram Baba received a few vegetables while begging door to door, I was overjoyed. Finally, here was something for him to eat besides raw peanuts. My heart sank, though, when he served my meal, and I saw that he had cooked all of the vegetables into the rice and dal and kept nothing for himself. He was joyful. Fascinated, I scrutinized him, but I found nothing artificial about him. He was utterly sincere in his devotion. I once asked Baba, "Why do you follow such difficult vows?" Meekly he replied, It helps me to be focused on my spiritual practices. But I am happy. And amazingly, he really was. Early one morning, before the light of day, I sat under a tree in the forest while contemplating this amazing person. I could not understand his strange vows. They seemed excessive and even unnecessary. But still, he had attracted my sincere love and trust. It is said that artificial austerity makes the heart hard. But his heart was soft and filled with humility, compassion, and devotion. Lord Jesus said, "You can judge a tree by its fruit." Although his appears to be a very strange tree, the ripened fruits are sweet. In Sitaram Baba's company, a question brewed in my mind. Most of the yogis I had encountered meditated on God as an impersonal force, while he and others meditated on the Lord as an all-loving person. Ram Sevak Swami served Lord Ram in such a personal way. Srila Prabhupada, too, expressed genuine love for Lord Krishna as an all-attractive person. Did this contradict the beliefs of those yogis who strove to merge their souls into a supreme impersonal oneness? Did it conflict with the practice of Buddhists who strove for a perfection of a qualityless nirvana? As a child, I had naturally prayed to God in a personal way, but as I studied philosophies, I found more and more leanings toward God being an all-pervading existence. While strolling together down a forest path one day, I inquired of Baba, "Is God ultimately impersonal or a person?" Coming to an abrupt halt, his bushy brown eyebrows tightened and his face, marked with deep furrows of a rugged life, cringed. He sighed. "How could our Lord have less personality and form than we have? He has everything without limit." He shook his head. "This misunderstanding breaks my heart." His reaction struck me. I was becoming more aware of this fundamental disagreement over the ultimate nature of the Supreme Lord. Was he an impersonal, disembodied force, or was he the Supreme Person? In a way, it was the same question I'd asked myself as a child, trembling during thunderstorms. Who was God? Was he comforting like my parents, or as formless as the wind? I was wrestling to reconcile this philosophical issue and knew the answer would help me to choose my path. But I couldn't find the missing piece in the puzzle. I had been meeting wonderful souls who held both opposing views. Days later, as I left Sitaram Baba, I contemplated that how much one loves God is not something that can always be measured by looking at external forms. On one hand, I found holy people working jobs and raising families, and on the other, I found this eccentric hermit of the forest. But what they all had in common was their humility, a deep focus on spiritual practices, and an unquenchable thirst to serve.